Hello, everybody. J-M here. This is a wonderful episode of Beyond the Table, a game or a show where we talk about the games that we love. And Steve, you've been on here. This will be, I think, the third time we've chatted on
I think
Beyond
so,
the
yeah.
Table. In case you're new to the iconic channel or don't know who Steve is, this is Stephen Chenault of Troll Lord Games. They publish amazing adventures in Castles and Crusades and the upcoming we'll talk about this later, but like the expanding and the re-release of Castles Zagyg.
Yes. The big one.
Thank you for joining me to talk about this. Like we got a couple of things I wanted to chat about. So yeah,
Well, I love coming on the show. Thanks for having me.
I always enjoy our discussions. We have a lot of interest on the line just beyond gaming. Like we enjoy the same kind of style of games. We enjoy talking about history and what's out there.
I have slipped down the alien UFO UAP rabbit hole. So
That's right. Right. I have lost many an hour. My best friend used to be in the space force and worked in NORAD. So I constantly was like, and then you went to the Stargate, and he's like, there is no Stargate. Sure. You have to say it. You have to say it. But well, first of all, the thing I wanted to chat about is this. This is Reforged. I have to say, what I love about Troll Lord Games is that, like, materialist, like the core of this material has not changed since you came out. Every new edition is essentially just let's clean it up a little bit. Let's change the art and the layout. Let's get those errata incorporated. So if you've been playing Castles and Crusades since day one, this is still fully compatible with everything.
That's been kind of the mission statement forever. And I have fought, I have stood the point against Davis and Mac and others that have wanted to make some changes and tweaks. I've been, nope, we're not changing anything. You can put that in a CKG or or what have you, but
like a little optional rule.
Optional rules. I remember when we released in 2004, so it's probably like 2008 or 10 or somewhere around in there. And Mac, who for those of you who don't know, Mac Golden and Davis Chenault designed the Siege engine, which is the mechanic that propels everything in CNC. And they wrote all of the rules for it and stuff like that. Anything in there that's kind of a how-to is something I wrote. If it's rules-based, it's something they wrote. So they developed the game. But I remember Mac came to the game one night, and he said, hey, man, I've solved the dilemma. So the dilemma was, in the very beginning, we wanted the whole one ring to rule them all. So one rule to rule them all, right? The Siege engine would be for all your attribute checks, all your skills, all your everything, and combat. But they never could really crack the combat side of it. So we went with standard, RPG combat that was prevalent in D&D and wherever else.
Yeah.
But about 6, 7, 8 years later, whatever it was, Matt came and said, dude, I figured it out. I figured out how to make the Siege engine work on combat. And he sat at the table before the game and showed me all his notes. And it was a pretty cool system. It was pretty good. And I said, well, that's great, Mac, but we're not putting in the player's handbook. It's too late for that. And it's never materialized, and he lost his notes. So,
oh, no.
Yeah, he couldn't find them last time I mentioned it to him. So.
That is the worst, when you have that moment of like you have this clear moment of epiphany, and you either lose your notes or you're like, I'll definitely remember this in the morning, because you sit up in the bed at like 2 a.m. You're like, I've solved it. And you go back to sleep and you're like,
I don't know.
That was it. That was my one moment.
There's probably somewhere a yellow notepad with his scribbles on it, because in those days I was using yellow notepads. That ream of lead. So somewhere probably around here, stuck in a drawer somewhere or something. Who knows? But he will email, or he usually texts. He doesn't email. He'll text me at God knows what time, 2 a.m. or something. Hey, I have this idea. And then we go from there. But yeah.
Well, one of the things I love about Reforged is, the new layout for Monsters and Treasure is just gorgeous. And all of the new art, that out of all of the books, I think that's the one that got the biggest facelift and the biggest change.
Without a doubt. The CKG, we hardly touched it at all. And the player's handbook, we had to redo some of the spells, and I chose to put the company back to its first printing you look at the first printing of the book, the spells were arranged without stat blocks. And Mack and Davis were very deliberate in doing that because they wanted it to be more story based and literary focused and not really focused on the mechanic of the spell, but kind of the spirit of it. So we went back to that, or a version of that, and that changed in the player's handbook. But the Monsters and Treasures got a hefty overhaul.
Yeah.
Without a doubt. There's a picture, and Jeremy Farkas handed that out. There's a picture for every monster now. We redid the stat blocks, included a little bit of amazing adventure stuff in there.
Great. It's super usable as a CK.
I'm glad you're enjoying it. Yeah, because I absolutely love it. Absolutely love it.
Now, I feel like I buried the lead. And the reason that you just came out with Reforged is, a couple of years ago, there was this OGL, as my friend John Doom says, the late unpleasantness regarding OGL. It's a very Pratchian way to say this. Now, and the reason I wanted to chat with you about this is because Troll Lord Games was one of, if not the first game company that took the OGL mechanics and made their own game system out of it. Most people were taking it to publish stuff for Dungeons and Dragons, but Troll Lord Games had Castles and Crusades, and it was its own thing. And so Reforged went through and stripped the OGL material out of this. So now Castles and Crusades is its own standalone thing.
Correct. Yeah, we were the first company that did that. We did that and started work on that in 2003. And I think it was December 2004 we released the Player's Handbook, and we're the only ones at that point who had taken everyone, including TLG, was using the OGL, as you mentioned, to do Dungeons and Dragons material for 3rd edition or 3.5, I think, at that point. And it was Mac's idea to take the OGL and say, hey, look, we can make our own role-playing game and keep these elements. And there's a bunch of reasons that went into that we've talked about before. But so we were the first ones to actually release it. We were very, the OGL was very good to us. It launched us. It put us on the map so well and allowed us to develop so quickly that we were able to work with Gary Gygax and bring his material out in a really nice fashion, which has continued to be part of the relationship to this day, whether it's through Gary Con or the estates, as we'll talk about in a little bit. But so when they did the late unpleasantness, what we call the dust up around here, and they did, they just kind of waded in and said, we're going to change all of this. Now, I got Davis on the phone. So Davis works for the company. He's our head writer. I manage the company, and Davis, and every time something's going on, I get on the horn of Davis and we go over it. And it took me about 3 or 4 hours of text before I stopped working on whatever I was working on, which I think was Codex of the Plains, to look at what was going on with the OGL being pulled or whatever. Yeah. When I finally looked at it, I was like, oh, my sweet God. Because they tried this on the 4th edition. They did some shenanigans with the GSL on the 4th edition and that type of stuff, which we did not sign on for. And I got Davis on the horn, and it took us about 3 minutes out stripping it all out. We're stripping all of this stuff out, stopping everything we're doing, and we're going to strip it all out because this is the second time this has happened. And as loyal as I was to the OGL and as appreciative as I am of the OGL, and such a great spirit that was done and allowed, I think, so much creativity and avenues for small publishers and everybody else to dive into this. And I think helped Wizards of the Coast in the beginning. I think it was very helpful to them. So I was still doggedly loyal to the OGL. We had talked about pulling it out between the 3rd and 4th printings, I think and we probably should have, but I was like, no, it's not. What could happen? It's not going anywhere. So I was wrong.
Well, I mean, right? Fool me once.
Yeah, that's
fool me twice. Yeah.
Yeah, that's at the end of it, and it's enough. And Davis has zero tolerance for any of that. I mean, zero tolerance. He's like, oh, let it go. We're done. He just doesn't want to deal with it. I don't blame him.
How difficult was it of a process for you guys? I mean, you said didn't seem to be a difficult decision to get to the point where you were like, all right, this has got to go.
That was the easy part.
But how difficult was it to go through? Like, were there like big changes that you thought and then you kind of pulled back? Like, what was the process of?
So the process got was chaotic in the beginning because the player's handbook, we just released the ninth printing, a complete repeat of the eighth printing. I think we changed like three things. I mean, literally three little edits between 8 and 9. So, as schedule wise, the only thing on the docket was the Monsters and Treasures, and we had just had a huge, like a year before, we'd had a huge binding issue, the only binding issue we've had with our printer, and they had replaced a good chunk of the line, So we were flush with Monsters and Treasures, so it wasn't in the offing either, and the CKG. I think we still had quite a few of those left. So nowhere were these 3 books in the offering to do. But what was being done was the Amazing Adventures book. We were overhauling both of that one book, turning it into 2, soon to be 3, and just adding all of the content in it and making it even more compatible with Castles and Crusades, the Siege Engine, and all that. So Jason was mostly done with that when the dust up started. And so Davis and I sat down, okay, what we have to do first is redo the spells. That's the most important thing, because Jason now can't do anything until we've redone the spells. Well, we were full in production on other material. I believe the Robert E. Howard art book was on the desk. I was writing the Codex of the Plains. We had a lot of projects that we were working on then that we couldn't stop because they were Kickstarters. Then the backers have to get their material, and they didn't sign on to deal with OGL stuff. They signed on to get the Robert E. Howard book. So we couldn't really stop stuff that we were doing and refocus as much as we wanted to. But the start of it was very bumpy because Davis and I were both, if we're going to do this, let's do it Davis and Steve style. And so Davis went through and he took all of the spells and renamed them into these really cool kind of literary names. Like I can't remember any. I have to pull the list up, but like Magic Missile, which is now Magi's Missile, but Davis had renamed to something like Kane's Arcane Whip. Some kind of
Jack Vancian sort of.
To give it that literary feel to it, right? So that was the first part, and he had done that entire list. And then I guess about 2 or 3 weeks later, I was looking. I said, "Dude, we can't do this because this is going to mess up so many people's 1st through 9th printings." So then we went back to the drawing board, and Jason's waiting this whole time to get his stuff done. And then we began, once we dove into it, and we realized that all of those spells, when we ported them over, we used the only thing we used the SRD primarily for was the spells. All of the classes we wrote ourselves, all of the other material we wrote ourselves. The Siege Engine was TLGs, but the spells we copied just chunks of it and put it in the book. So we had to go through each spell and rewrite each spell. And that ended up landing on my desk. Davis started it. I can't remember what he was working on, something else, and I couldn't pull him off of that. So I just stopped the Codex of the Plains and I started rewriting spells and then reformatting them and all that stuff. And meanwhile, about that time, we hired Jeremy Farkas to come on board specifically to help with editing at first, but then with the Monsters and Treasures, because it was just too much. Because the magic items section also was taken from the SRD. So those needed to be rewritten. And we didn't change the nature of anything. We just changed the wording, right? It still does.
That's really all you had to do. But it's a big
project. It does the exact same thing, but it's a lot of rewriting. I mean, it's a good third of the player's handbook, if not more. So that ended up taking months. So it took a lot longer to do than we anticipated, because I would not allow, though things got delayed, I wouldn't allow us to stop working on existing projects to fix these, because we can't do that. Not to the people who've already backed stuff. So it was 2023, right? That was January 23. Yeah, 23 and into 24 was a mess.
So one of the things that was great about the OGL was that it was essentially all of these little streams feeding into the same river, right? If I bought a complete wizard from Mongoose, or a monster book from Trollord, or all of these different products, they all sort of fed into this kind of D20 river that was moving downstream. And one of the big things we've seen out of the OGL is that the time of that single stream may now be over. I kind of related it to cable TV, right? We had You had to buy all of your cable things differently, and then you could just buy cable and it came with everything. And then we had streaming, and now everything's fractured again. Because now we have the Orc license, and we have the Morkborg license, and we have two different versions of the OGL from Wizards, one under Creative Commons and one's the original OGL. Do you see that? Do you see those streams ever coming back together, or do you think that this is one of those kind of watershed moments where things aren't going to go back?
I think what's going to happen, and we don't really, and at Troller Games, we don't really operate under a license. We haven't created any kind of license. We own copyright to this material. We move on. But I think that that cat, I think it's definitely fractured, no doubt, and it's never going to go back to the way it was. However, I think that some of this terminology has become so common in the gaming sphere, from video games to RPGs to game boards to card games, that it's never going back. Magic Missile, Armor Class, the hit 6 points. Attributes, it's hit points, alignment. It's now part of, whether Wizards of the Coast wants to claim it in their Creative Commons or not, it's not relevant anymore, because there's video games that use this stuff that have no attachment to that or the OGL or anything else. And I think I'm not sure when it is legally. I'm not a lawyer by any stretch of the imaginations, but once stuff starts entering into the common usage and people are making money off of it and you don't stop them, then you can't. My understanding is you can't really endanger someone's livelihood if you've let something go for 20 years. You know what I mean?
Right. I remember I was playing a video game called City of Heroes. It was the superhero MMO. And everybody was up in arms that, Marvel and DC were having these little lawsuits against City of Heroes because you could use their character generator to recreate their IP in the game.
Right.
And the best sort of discussion I heard of that was, listen, they don't actually think they're going to win any of these, but if they ever stop defending it, that becomes precedent for the next guy to say, well, you didn't defend it there, so you can't come after me.
Yep, that's exactly right. And that's why TSR in the early days was so litigious, because they were trying to protect this in the 70s. And this has been forgotten by a lot of people. In the 70s, there were tons of little role-playing game companies cropping up everywhere. And they were competing with D&D and TSR, and they had to defend you have to do that. But at this point, I think the cat's out of the bag. It's done. The OGL did that, and then just 10 or 15 years or whatever it is of video games using this content.
Yeah.
I think that in many ways it's going to stay fractured, but I think there's still this kind of umbrella of a community that's ginormous, that includes all of these, mediums of play, whether it's card games or RPG or video games or board games or whatever. Now, I think RPGs are the most unique of these by a long stretch of the imagination. And I think it's a lack of understanding of what the RPG actually is that causes the confusion for a lot of companies, because they don't really know what they're selling. They think they're competing and they're not. But I don't think it's ever going to come back. Not like it was. I just don't think it can.
Well, you have a lot of things that I'm really excited to talk about that are kind of, eminent to getting into, either people's hands or coming to Kickstarter. Let's start with the starter set. I was really excited. So you got a Castles and Crusades starter box that's coming out.
Yes, that is. So Jeremy Farkas has written that. And we got the art just the other day, like a week or so ago. Justin Garner, I think his name is. Fantastic art for this thing. I got the quote literally for the box on my desktop here. So it's moving forward at a very, very rapid pace. This thing has been it's been in the offing for many, many, many years. We have had requests for a basic set, starter set, an introductory set for, we've been publishing CNC for we're in our 21st year now. Yeah. We did one way back in the day called the Harbinger's variant. It was free to retail stores. If a retail store hollered us, we'd send them this box set that had the player's handbook, a little monster thing, and adventures and dice and other stuff, and kind of how to play type thing. And then we did the white box, which was a sort of a basic, but not really.
Yeah.
It was somewhere around in there. And I think it's funny because Davis has wanted this for a while. Chuck Gumbo, who works for us, he's wanted it for a while. And Jeremy, when he joined the company a year or 2 years ago, he immediately said, "We need a starter kit, and we need something so people can learn how to play it." And I've been against it the whole time. I'm like, listen, the player's handbook is the starter kit. It's easy. It's not. The game is so simple. I don't know how you can make it even more simple. And so this conversation has been going on for a while. And interestingly enough, and everyone's going to grumble me at the company, but what tipped me over for the starter kit was last year at, I think it was GaryCon. I'm pretty sure it was GaryCon. And I was talking to Dakota. So Dakota's running our conventions for us. Dakota McMurray runs our conventions. And he's a younger guy, and he's really, he's just super enthusiastic. He loves the game. You've met him. He's just,
Dakota's great. He sold me on a misprinted copy of
Denarum.
That's right.
Yes, I remember.
That was amazing. It was a hard sell. I was like, listen, sure. Like, what?
There were 6 of them like that or something. Yeah. So Dakota said to me, because everyone was talking about the starter kit, and I was grumbling, we got the player's handbook. I'm like that old curmudgeonly, right? Yeah, back in my day. But so Dakota said, there's a lot of people coming to this booth. They're interested in CNC, but they don't want to carry 9 pounds of full color books away and have to put it in a bag, and all that stuff. And he said, if I had something small that could get them started, I know we could get a lot more people playing it. And I thought, well, holy shit, that actually makes a lot of sense. So it was Dakota that tipped me over the top. So everyone can thank Dakota for that. And I greenlit it. So I'll say this because I have to, when I'm wrong, I'm wrong. I've been opposed to this thing for many, many years, and we put it on pre-order a week ago, and it has blown the doors off. It has been selling like hotcakes. So I have to eat a little crow. I was wrong. We needed the starter kit, and we should have it hopefully within. I'm hoping by GaryCon, but probably won't have the box ready by GaryCon. So
okay, so that's imminent.
Yes, by April for sure.
What's going to come in the box?
So you're going to get the character creation guide, and this is about 36 pages, and it's basically how to create your character. And what Jeremy has done, and this I do like, because it's really geared for people who aren't like you and I, who've never really role played, right? Yeah. So that because it is a different. It takes a hot minute to kind of shift your mind.
Oh yeah.
Into doing this, right? So he explains step by step how to create your character, equip it, and all this other stuff. The second book is the director's guide, I think is what we ended up calling it. And the names on these things went through 2 days of nonstop discussions till we were all so tired of it. Just we couldn't take it anymore. And that's got how to actually play the game. That's how the siege engine works, and then it has the something of the dark. It's got an adventure in there.
A little adventure, awesome.
A little adventure in there. It'll have a set of dice and some character reference sheets and a few other odd and ends that are tucked in there. So everything you need to kind of learn how to role play, learn how to play Castles and Crusades, learn how to make your character, and start your first adventure, and then you're off.
Awesome! I can't wait. Already got a review planned for it when it gets.
So I'll tell you, and the funny part. So we went through. I don't really like it. It goes back to this spell thing I was talking about earlier, and Davis doesn't either. I don't really like starter kit. I don't like introductory kit. I don't like basic, expert, any of this. It just drives me nuts. So we were trying all kinds of different variances, and I finally took Chuck and Davis and I were in a meeting, and I wish we could have recorded this because I was going through. I'm on Merriam-Webster's, going through the thesaurus, looking for related words. And I found one. How do you pronounce this? It's abecedemaron. I think it's abecedarian, and it means it's this archaic word that means to get the component parts of and learn something. And I said, "That's it, dude, Davis, abecedarian. This is the word." Yeah, it's kind of awesome. And Davis went ape. She says, "This is it. We're calling it this." And you could tell Chuck was like, "Wait a minute, brakes." But Davis and I were so keyed up that we're just so keyed up. And then I could tell Chuck was a little reluctant to call it something that nobody on earth is going to know what it is.
Well, obviously, what you need is our ABC Darien starter set.
Right. Yeah. We weren't even going to call it the starter kit.
Yeah, just ABC Darien.
Castles and Crusades, ABC Darien. And so we got Gracie, and I thought, all right, so Grace is she's always perpetually optimistic. She's really good. She handles our social media, social marketing, all that. She's really good at that stuff. Let's get Gracie just to get her thought. So you got to understand, Grace is so supportive. It is amazing.
Oh yeah.
Oh, she's crazy supportive.
The ray of sunshine. Yeah.
Yeah, ray of sunshine. So she gets into the meeting with the three of us, and I picture the title. I can tell this look of, I gotta be supportive, but this is a horrible idea. This is terrible. And I think David said, I don't know if she said it first. She might have said, we want an easy entry barrier, and this might not be the word. And then Davis goes, you just threw water on my bonfire. It was, it was great. So we abandoned that and just went with starter kit. So,
well, I mean, when I like to tell a story that when I started gaming, I received a book in 5th grade. Somebody gave me a copy of a superhero role-playing game because they were like, this seems like something you would be into. And I read that thing cover to cover for like 3 years, and I had no clue it was a game. Like, I just thought it was a way to make superheroes, and then like you could pit them against each other. Like, I understood the combat system, if that made sense. So I could tell, whether this hero could beat this hero. And it wasn't until I was in middle school, like first day of middle school, I sat down at lunch and these guys were like, hey, you want to play GURPS? And I'm like, I don't even know what that is. Sure. And I was hooked. But it took me seeing the game being played to understand how that this was a game. And I think that's something that maybe the modern gamer doesn't have to deal with as much because it's become much more ubiquitous, but you had to learn this from somebody back in the day.
Yeah, we have a similar story. When we got started, Davis got the little brown books in 1975. He says 4 or 5, I can't remember, whatever, mid-70s. And he and I played a lot of war games in those days, hill games and stuff. He got those books and he read them. He had no clue. And he told me, I don't remember any of this, but he told me, I had no idea what this was. I just threw them in the closet. He just tossed them in the closet. And there they sat for about 6 months until he was part of a mail, what was it? When you played war games via mail, he would write, it was a Conan Hyborian Age via mail. And so he would write, and I think he was, what is that, Eastern Kingdom by the River, whatever kingdom that is. That's who he was, and he was playing that. And somewhere in all of that, he got a hint of what this D&D was, and he pulled it back out and made me like 9 characters or 11 characters or whatever it is, and we started playing. Yeah. But there's no, today you can hop on YouTube and say, okay, what is this?
Yeah, there's no actual plays. Like there was no, had to learn from somebody else. And
it's very weird. It's
a weird hobby, but
yeah, it is. And it's not intuitive if you have no idea what this is. I mean, at the end of the day, you're doing make-believe on paper. Now, you've got rules for whatever is rolling around in your head, but it doesn't say that anywhere. And that's one of the things that Jeremy he pushes in this starter kit is this is what this is. It's, I think he uses, and one of the reasons we went with character creation and director's guide is because he uses the metaphor. This is like a play and you're an actor in a play. And so we went with that on the titles, but hopefully it serves its purpose because it's not an intuitive hobby.
No, it's not, but there's nothing like it.
There's nothing like it.
There's nothing like it.
And almost anyone can enjoy it. It doesn't, almost everybody plays out stories in their heads. It doesn't matter who you are. You do that. And that's basically what this is. Yeah. And once you've kind of shown people that video games, board games, and card games have boundaries and all of this stuff, and RPGs do not, it opens up that imaginative world that we all have, right? We all share.
I remember I was teaching some people who had sort of flirted with role-playing games before, but never actually played in a game. And they came to a corridor and they had to choose right or left. And they went left and we played throughout the rest of the session. They're like, well, what would have happened if I had gone right? was like, well, you don't know that. Like, he was like,
Yeah.
but do you know that? And like, well, that would be telling. But
Yeah.
like this idea that, I don't have to stay on the Monopoly board or, the Catan Island. I can, use that, wood to build a ship and sail off to, lands unknown.
And how many games have actually done that? I can't. Mine are countless. Where I've got all. This is what we're doing. They do 5 minutes of ground. We're doing this.
Yeah, and that, I think, I won't get on this soapbox, but I'll just kind of dust it off. That's why I am vehemently opposed to the idea of the quantum ogre. Well, it doesn't matter where the players go. The ogre's still waiting for them. Like, that defeats the point of this hobby. Like, the whole point of the hobby is we can do anything in our imagination. And if all you do is, if you're playing a shell game with your players, I think you're doing yourself and them a disservice, but that is not why we're here to talk. So I got this, and I don't have my collector's, the nice leatherette one, but let's talk about the Gygax estate and what Trollord is doing with them. The Hermit, I know we don't want to spoil it. You did not undersell this to me the last time we talked. Like, or you did not oversell it to me. Like, this adventure
it's crazy.
Is amazing. I can't wait to show this to my players.
And I've been very careful with this. So the Hermit. So Gary Gygax wrote the Hermit originally for Legendary Adventures, a game he was selling before he signed on with us in 2001. And when I kept telling him, "Dude, we need D20s exploding. We need some adventures. We need something to put out." So he gave us the Hermit, and I remember reading it, thinking. And Jeremy said it best. When he did the first pass to convert it to Castles and Crusades, because we went back to Gary's original LA text, so we could get as close to Gary as we could. Jeremy said, "Man, this starts out like any normal drum adventure, and then suddenly,
it's that whole
you're like, what the is going on?"
Yeah, it feels so. I came into role playing games through Palladium. And Palladium Fantasy always had a strong focus on fairies and fairy tales kind of out in the woods doing mischievous things. This feels more like a fairy tale than it feels like a dungeon crawling adventure. Although there is dungeon crawling, but it's not the way you think that it's going to be.
Right. The classic maze is there. Yeah. It's, when you look at Gary's writings, especially as adventures, it's one of those things that, and then this is the never-ending conversation about old school is tough and you die really easy or whatever. It maybe just depends on how your DM ran. I mean, we had soft DMs back in the 80s and 70s, just like whatever. And that's part of a different conversation. But I think that what the designers and writers from the Jim Ward and Gary back from the 70s and 80s brought to the table was there were no tropes at that point. So their minds are unlocked. It's like, for those of us who have followed fiction over the years, if you read fantasy fiction from the 80s, probably up to about 87, 88, it's wild. I mean, it's all over the place. I mean, it's just everywhere. But by the 90s, once Tolkien had become a thing and trilogies were required from publishers, and now writers are having to kind of, shape their creations to the publishing environment, and everyone wanted the tropes. You get fantasy, still great, it's still good stuff, but it's lacking that kind of what the am I reading? What is going on here? And I think that's what the Hermit definitely and Gary stuff brings, because there's this, and you said it best, it's more like a fairy tale. There's this classic fantasy merged with this classic realism that makes it grim and hard to live and dangerous, but yet fantastical.
Yeah, and there's some whimsy in there. It's, if you haven't purchased the Hermit, there will be a link in the show notes. Go grab it. But I love everything about this, the the art, the layout, even the paper. You used a different paper quality than you do for the.
It's funny you should mention that. I'm going apeshit over that paper. You're going to start seeing that paper appear in a lot.
It's wonderful. It is indeed a quality of life improvement. I was like, wow, I really hope going forward we see
It feels like paper.
It feels like paper. It doesn't have the kind of the glossy kind of modern.
Yep.
I will say when you're talking about fantasy, my son and I every morning we read. We have kind of our morning routine is what we call it. And after we get like breakfast done, we sit and we've been reading, we read through Tolkien, we read through Lewis, but we just finished. I've read him all of the Conan stories, all of Lovecraft's fiction, Lord Dunsany, and now we're starting Clark Ashton Smith.
Oh,
and
wow.
he is
That's
like,
awesome.
he's like, this is because he's read Dragonlance and he's read some Terry Pratchett and he's read obviously Tolkien, and he's like listening to the Wheel of Time, but he's like, there's nothing like this stuff. This is
I read
crazy.
I've got a huge collection of paperbacks, and about 6-8 months ago, whatever it was, I was just bored, and I just went to the shelves. And I needed something small so that it didn't take up too much time, and it was Songs of the Drownlands by, I think it's Elizabeth Scarborough. I can't remember. She's pretty big in the day back in the 80s. So I read this book, and I hadn't read it, in 30 years, and it was so different and just so cool. I mean, it was just, oh, this is just this is the fantasy I remember. That there's I don't know what's going. I don't know what to expect. I can't tell what's going to happen next.
One of my favorite books that I keep returning to because it's my jam is The Broken Sword by Paul Anderson.
Oh my God.
Right. And it's so small. It's so easily digestible, but there's just so much packed into that book.
That book catapulted. I had never read it. I never read much. That's Paul Anderson, right? Yeah. I'd never read much of his back in the Woebegone days. And Jeremy actually mentioned it to me. He said, hey, dude, you got to read this, but read the original.
Yeah.
Printing. So, and I'm kind of a bibliophile. So I got online and I found a hardcover version published in 54, 64, whatever it was. And it was phenomenal. I mean, it was a phenomenal read. Yeah. And the nice thing about books, and I think this is where, I don't want this to sound like a criticism because it's not, but the 150 page book, that's okay. It's really okay.
I'm wearing my Bridge Burner sweatshirt, and that is 670 is the smallest book in that. It just kind of goes up.
It's like Game of Thrones, Wheel of Time. These are huge, monstrous books, and the Game of Thrones. I'm not going to say much about it. The Game of Thrones is its own thing, but I remember I was still deep into fantasy when the first Wheel of Time came out. And everyone was talking about it, and I went and looked at it, and it's like 800 pages or 500 pages or whatever it is. I thought, I don't have time. I'm not reading this. This is too much. And I just walked away. So I've never read them. I need to sit down and read them at some point.
I just finished the reread. Nah,
not so much. It was one of those things that I mean, for last year I got into Louis L'Amour.
Oh yeah,
pretty quick because you pick it up, and I remember I just picked one up at a flea market. My wife and I are doing. There's a Louis L'Amour. So I just buy Louis L'Amour. So I bought it. I started reading it that afternoon. I was done by Sunday morning.
Yeah,
it was nice, cool story.
Yeah,
I'm done. I can move on.
That's what I always loved about the Thieves World novels. Is like the Thieves World novels. They were like 150 pages, and there's like 8 stories in there. And yeah, if you're reading all through like all of the different Thieves World's anthologies, sure, you're going to see these threads kind of move through, but you don't have to. You pick it up, you read a story that's 30 or 40 pages, and you're like, oh, I'm done. Yeah.
I can move on. Yeah, it's kind of nice.
Well, and I think there was I remember reading Jonathan Tweet writing about 3rd edition. And there's a distinct change between, rule sets aside, there's a distinct change between the 1E and 2E era of Dungeons and Dragons and the 3rd edition going on. Jonathan Tweet said they made a conscious decision when writing 3rd edition that D&D was large enough to be self-referential. Right in 1E and 2E, like if you read the fighter, they're like, you can play Gilgamesh or Beowulf or Charlemagne or one of his knights. Like they use these real world references to sort of point you back to the Appendix N and like the places that they were drawing on for inspiration. And from 3.0 on, D&D has just become kind of self-referential. And I think I love tropes. I think tropes are essentially myths, so it makes it really easy to talk. But once we became kind of self-referential, we kind of see the same ideas now recapitulated. There's less stuff coming in from the outside to totally,
to blow your mind.
Exactly.
Because you grow to expect it, and it's like if you watch westerns or Star Wars movies, they're all kind of the same. The superhero movies, all great movies. I love them all, but we kind of know how this is going to play out before. And that's one reason that I've gotten into watching. I really watch a lot of low budget films, just new directions, because I don't know what the hell's going on. And it's awesome. And you get gems. Like I'm watching Severance right now, and Severance has caught me. It's given me a couple of really nice twists, so that's good. But so tropes are good, but you're right. What they do is they shut out. You're becoming self-referential, like you mentioned. You start shutting things out, and that's never good.
Yeah. So let's talk about. We talked about it the last time. The big news that Troll Lord and the Gygax estate have reached an agreement. The reprint of Castles. My brain just died.
Castle
Zagyg came out, and I have it on my shelf. It was great, but that was not. And we got the Hermit, and that did well. The Castles Zagyg is coming out.
Yeah. So
tell us about that, and when are we expecting the? I saw the trailer. The trailer is amazing.
Grace, great. We put up a new one yesterday. Grace has done a great job with those. So for those who may not know, Gary. He started creating Dungeons and Dragons, and I won't get into all of it. Arneson, there was a whole bunch of people involved. But when he began running the game, he started running it in this dungeon that eventually became, the Dungeons of Castle Greyhawk and part of the World of Greyhawk and all this other stuff. So these are his original notes in the 1970s that, this is what's on level 9. And you can see when you're reading the notes, you can see that's literally how we played back then. We didn't really worry about if the ink in the inkwell was dry. That really wasn't part of what we were doing, the way we gamed in the 70s. That comes later. But so he had this monstrous 17 levels in this castle, or in this dungeon, and some of them have, at least 2 have sub-levels. So I think there's 21 total levels. Yeah. And these are beneath a castle, and the castle itself is huge, and there's the bonds in the castle, and then 2 towers, and the castle is in the Eastmark setting area, which is about 25 square miles, give or take, and then there's the city of Yigsburg. So all of this, when we're talking about Castle Zagyg, that's what we're talking about. The city, the setting, the castle, the environs around the castle, and the dungeon itself. Now, Castle Zagyg itself, in the terminology of the setting, is the castle where the wizard Zagyg dwelt, and the dungeons beneath it, those 21 levels of dungeons, that's where he was experimenting with his magic and doing all kinds of weird and crazy stuff. And we were working on this 2 years before, well, really 3 or 4 years before he died. He started with Yigsburg, Eastmark Folio, brought in Jeff Talanian and some other people, did some fantastic work on this stuff. And we published Yigsburg, the city, and then we published the Upper Works, which was the first level of the dungeons, all of the castle, and the environs. And that's when the license was pulled, and he passed away in March of 2008. We published that stuff, and then the license was pulled in August. So we really, of this legendary castle that anyone who started back in the 70s heard of at some point.
Yeah, and it's one of the great tragedies of the TSR era is that we never, there have been multiple attempts, some of them we'll just say some of them lesser than others.
Yeah, there
you go. I've got 3 box sets or 2 box sets or whatever of Undermountain, and that's not even detailing Undermountain, but at least I have Undermountain. Castle kind of it's been this legend that we've been chasing after since we got into the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And you hear about it, but there was never anything. And like you said, the books that came out that were supposed to be it, whatever. Move on. But it lacked Gary's, panache. Is that the word? Yeah, so now what we're doing now is we've signed contracts with these estates. The Hermit was the first. Well, the first thing we did is re-release Yigsburg, the city book,
which was great. It was great
yeah,
to be able to have it.
we needed something out fast to show everybody that look, Gary's back because he's been gone for 15 years, right? His material, the wealth of his material is gone. Then we did the GFW stuff in a Kickstarter, and that did exceedingly well. And now we're rolling into Castle Zagyg. We've got Reforged done, Amazing Adventures done, the Armory stuff done. So now we can turn our attention to Castle Zagyg. We're not going to Kickstarter this time. We're using Backer Kits crowdfunding.
Right.
It launches on the 3rd of March, but it's going to be a monster. It's going to be an absolute monster. And the plan is we've hired Mike Stewart to come on board to write all of the levels. He's on level 3, I think, 3A or something. I need to give him a call, but so he's going to write them all, and we're going to try to get 1.5, like every 3 weeks, get a level done, at least in this rough draft form. So we get this quickly. We don't need to wait another 10 years for this. We've been waiting long enough. And Mike Stewart actually writes. He's written quite a few things for us, and he writes in that kind of AD&D style.
There was a specific way that Gary wrote. Yeah.
So and we've got Gary's notes, so we're going to try to include as much of the oddities as he wanted, as he envisioned in there. We're exceedingly excited about it. We're going to jump into it. If we've got the sign up page on our website, just go sign up for the launch.
Awesome. Well, Steve, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me about all of this. I always enjoy our conversations, and hopefully I'll get to see you at a couple of conventions and maybe do dinner again.
No doubt. That sounds great. Absolutely. Thanks for having me on.
All right. So that's it. That's the end of this Beyond the Table. There will be more in 2025 as things arise.